Hi.
Hi, Alexandra. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well.
Cool. We are live right now, and so we'll just wait a little bit. Hey, Yulia.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. I was about to Slack you. I was like, where are you at? And we have 27 people here. Awesome. I sent you a link to the presentation. If you're able to do the presentation mode, let me know. Or if I should lead it, let me know.
I think you should lead it because I'm going to hop off so I can leave you two on there.
Okay, great.
You know how to do it, right? Just the screen?
I've done. Let me just make sure I have it. So I'm going to click the screen button. Okay, Let me figure out how to make sure my whole screen's not being shared. 1 second. So does it make sense to do it from a PDF instead of the Google View situation?
I honestly think it's whatever's easier for you, whatever you think is, I've seen more Google versus PDF, but really up to you.
Let's see, here we go. I think, can you let me know if you're seeing something?
Yep.
Perfect, and I'll do presentation mode. So you're seeing only the Chrome window, not the, you're not seeing anything else in the background, right? Perfect.
I think once you press present, you'll be able to,
Perfect.
we'll be able to see everything.
View, full present.
Yes. Before we get started, everyone, if you want to maximize the presentation that Yulia is presenting, click on that screen twice to maximize it. But we are going to wait a couple more minutes before we get started. And since we're on here, it's been a while since I've actually hosted one of these things. In the session tab, if you guys can kind of let us know where you're calling from, what school you guys are coming from, or attending right now, or we'll be going back to in the fall.
I'd also love to know what people are doing this summer. If you're interning, right where you're interning, perhaps write about what you'd love to do. If you're not interning right now, what would be your dream job? I'd love to know who's in the room since there's likely a mix of backgrounds and career aspirations.
Cool. Yes, ask questions through the chat. We will be monitoring the chat. Of course, Yulia and Alexander are going to present first, and then hopefully towards the end, we have a couple of minutes to ask questions. We have people calling from Brazil, NYC, awesome. St. Lawrence University, India, awesome.
International crowd today, I love it. I love seeing New York. That's home for me. I'm personally based in Palo Alto right now, but I grew up in New York and was originally born abroad in Ukraine.
And I'm in Florida today and have been since March, although I normally work in New York City. Things aren't too hot in Florida right now. So,
well, I hope you're staying safe.
Thank you. Yes.
I love the Bustle office. That was one of my favorite office visits back when I was managing Stanford's internship program in New York. That you step out of the elevator and it's such a cool media, like new media environment. You really feel like you're not in a traditional newsroom or in a traditional media company.
I know, it's so sad that we are not there right now.
It's definitely a fun place to visit.
I'm actually in the house I grew up in my mom's house. So it is very funny to be back home, as I'm sure a lot of people are right now.
Yeah, I think a lot of students are back home for the summer in their childhood bedroom, and a lot of people who are, more experienced professionals are all throughout the country, and some are back at home. I'm happy to be in Palo Alto. It's been a good place to be during the pandemic. People have been really following all the guidelines. But certainly miss New York City and my loved ones. So excited to kick this off. Do you think we should get started in the next minute or so?
Let's definitely get started. Let me introduce myself, and then I'm going to kick it off to both you, Yulia and Alexandra. Hello, everyone. I hope you are all doing well. My name is Kathleen, and I am part of the URX team, which is hosting this event. URX is a community of early talent professionals, and we all have the same passion in really helping students and helping them find job opportunities. And what came about with this session that we've been doing every Wednesday is a talent development program During COVID-19, we wanted to really provide students with an opportunity to gain professional development and learn about different companies throughout the summer. And I think this is probably our 6th or 7th one. So we've been going really strong. We have a couple more left, but I'm super excited about this session today, hosted by Yulia and Alexandra. I'm going to kick it off to you guys, and you guys can go ahead and introduce yourself. I'm going to log off. But at the end, we are going to take questions, and then we'll also announce a winner. We're doing resume reviews too, and connecting you with a recruiter from our community who will talk to you and give you some advice, career advice. So off to you guys, and thank you all for joining us.
Thanks for the intro. So as you just heard, please make sure to double click on the screen share option to maximize the video so that you can see our presentation. And Alexandra and I put together a few bullet points, but we're going to elaborate more as we speak, and we will definitely save room for Q&A. There's a few things that we're going to be talking about that are very actionable tips. So if you are somebody who wants to be a live case study later on during the Q&A session, let us know, and we'll walk through this process with you of how to potentially think about building out your network or make other changes. So to get started, we're going to kick off with introductions. Alexandra, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself, and then I'll go after you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hey, everybody. So excited to be here this afternoon. My name is Alex Finkel, and I'm the Director of Talent Acquisition and Inclusion here at Bustle Digital Group. As Yulia mentioned, she actually came by our office. Was it last year?
Last winter.
Last winter, yeah. But today, coming to you here from Florida. So a little bit about Bustle Digital Group. We are the largest digital publisher for millennial and Gen Z readers. We own and operate 8 different websites, including, and hopefully you all are familiar with some of them, Bustle.com, Nylon Magazine, Elite Daily, and Mike.com. I've been at the company for 7 years, which is basically a lifetime in publishing. And I helped launch our flagship site, Bustle.com, back in 2013. Since then, we've been really lucky to grow to over 500 employees across the country, across all different departments, video, editorial, tech, sales, etc. And a bit of a background on me, I started my career in editorial. I went to journalism school and was pretty sure I was going to end up as a writer or editor. But once I joined Bustle and helped get the site off the ground, I found that I really liked the operations side of things. And have been working in editorial and people operations since then. And that means I oversee all of our internship and fellowship programs, all of our hiring and recruiting across the board in all of our departments, and our diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies as well. And one of my favorite things is speaking to students and recent grads, offering any and all advice that I wish I knew back in the day. And had. So really excited to be here today and share a little bit of my wisdom. And hopefully it'll be really helpful.
Thanks for that. And Bustle has just some really cool publications. I love following all the growth and changes over the years. So my name is Yulia Mikhailovska. I lead university talent programs for Greylock Partners. Greylock is a venture capital firm based on Sand Hill Road in California, but we invest globally. And we invest in software businesses, both consumer software companies and enterprise software companies. So names that you might know and early investments of ours where we invested in the Series A, Series B stages are companies such as Airbnb, Discord, Workday, Solve, Nextdoor, and many brands that have really defined Silicon Valley and changed the kind of startup ecosystem that you see today. And it's a really wonderful place to learn and grow. So I look for primarily undergraduate and graduate engineering talent, looking at people looking for roles in software engineering, product design, data science, and machine learning, sometimes as well product roles, although I'm seeing a little bit of a shift of the product roles not being as entry level anymore. So it's primarily 4 areas: software engineering, product, data science, and product design. Prior to my role at Greylock, I ran an internship and alumni engagement program for Stanford University in their New York office. They have a New York program where I was able to help dozens, actually hundreds of students get access to internships at brands throughout New York City across a variety of fields. So it wasn't just focused on tech, but also journalism and theater and a wide variety of industries outside of tech. And prior to that role, I was a platform manager, and that's where I got my first start in the talent world at a different venture capital firm, a firm called Layer Hippo Ventures, based out in New York City. And they also do early stage investing. For a way of background on what I had studied back when I was in college, I studied international relations when I was a student at Stanford. And I decided, thanks to my junior year summer internship at the United Nations, that I don't want to stay in international relations. So certainly have a shift from what I studied back in school to what I do now. So that's a bit about Alex and me. I hope that gives some context of what lens we're looking at this information with. So to give you a sense of the agenda, I'll kick us off with some information about connecting virtually and staying in touch. Alex will give some do's and don'ts and tips on resumes and cover letters, as well as some employment assessments. And we'll really try to save time for Q&A so we can go into specific answers to the questions that are top of mind for you. And Alex will jump into my session, I will jump into hers, so it'll be very interactive. And feel free to put things in the chat window as questions come up about whatever we're saying so that we can clarify as needed. So connecting virtually and staying in touch. A lot of people love the summer internship opportunity as a way to build in-person relationships with people in a variety of offices, as well as other fellow interns who might be heading to big job markets like New York or San Francisco. The pandemic has definitely turned things a bit upside down. And so we're now all in this virtual world and trying to stay in touch and build new connections in different ways. So I have a few tips here and I want to talk through each one. Many online events programs actually let you see who it is that's attending the event beforehand. And I certainly recommend that you really research who is attending. So not just look at their name, but make sure you check them out on LinkedIn and on other platforms. Perhaps doing a search on Google. What are they doing? What articles might they have published? What has been in their sphere of information, etc. Really know who is attending so that you know who to expect in an event, whether it's virtual or in person. And perhaps take an opportunity to identify a few people that you might want to reach out to. I was in a networking event recently, and I had pre-identified and done some research on people who will be in that room, sent them a quick note saying that I look forward to connecting because we have a shared interest in a specific area, and I clarified that. And that way, when I saw them in the virtual room, it wasn't their first time seeing my name, and they had a bit of context about who I am. I also really recommend, particularly for events like this or webinars, etc., be the person who actually submits questions beforehand. It is really interesting to be on the receiving end and see how few people actually submit those questions. And oftentimes, if you take the extra step to craft a great question, you might be called out on that webinar. So you get a bit of chance to shine and your name starts to be in the frame of reference of whoever is running the event or running an information session that about opportunity that they'll be hiring. And then last but not least, I think coming prepared. So I think the research is certainly in tandem with coming prepared, but you shouldn't show up to an event not knowing anything about Bustle, for example, or not knowing anything about Greylock. If you know which people are presenting, you want to do research and come prepared about what those businesses do so you can ask informed questions and not mistake that, so-and-so company is actually in the arts field when you could have easily done 2 seconds of research that it's not in that field. And we're all at our computers right now, so we can do research on the go, which means the barrier to being prepared is even lower. I would certainly look on a variety of platforms in addition to URX to find opportunities and novel ways to connect. So a lot of people are hosting things on LinkedIn, on Twitter, Instagram Live. Greek organizations and social groups and religious groups, etc., are hosting their own meetups, book clubs, etc. I think a lot of people are razor focused on finding their professional networking opportunities in the most obvious ways, meaning, let's say I'm looking for a design internship, I might only choose to go to design opportunities. I personally disagree with that. I think you never know where your opportunities are going to come from, and you want to have a wider sphere of people who know about what it is you're looking for and people that you're needing. So I would look at and follow people in your industry. You don't have to necessarily connect with them on LinkedIn if you don't know them. You can use the follow feature on LinkedIn so that you're informed and you see their posts about upcoming opportunities. My third point around opportunities coming from anywhere is really more of a reminder to remember that every interaction you have with somebody can be life-changing, and you should be treating everyone with respect. Certainly that goes for the people who might be on a team you join, but it also goes towards recruiters or program managers or their assistants, or even people in the same building or same vicinity. I have had this very interesting set of experiences in my life of late where people from areas of life that I never thought we'd intersect, we are intersecting. And I'm really glad that, we have a cordial relationship and you're always treating people with respect. Not only if it's someone that you stand to, gain access and opportunity, but really you should be respectful to everyone because the world is quite small. And one of my favorite proverbs is that, two mountains will never meet, but two men will. So you just never know whose sister might be the EA of the vice president, or perhaps somebody at your university in a department you're in or in the career service center is actually very much in touch with a hiring manager. And so you want to be sure that you're treating everyone with respect and leaving the interaction in a way that makes them want to help you versus being rude or dismissive or behaving in a way that's not favorable. I love this idea of making a list of people to meet, kind of a dream list. There's an author named Pat Headley who wrote a book about meeting 100 people. And, what better time than now when we all have the time to think about who would you want in your dream network? Which people across a variety of companies might be great to meet. And don't think about the obvious kind of C-level or higher level managers, but think about people who might be your peers or a few years out. Don't just network, with the highest up, but try to network with peers and other levels, as well as fellow interns, as I see you're all doing in the chat window right now. And then my last point around virtual networking is to really leverage the LinkedIn alumni search feature in conjunction with your school's directory. So many of you will have a directory that you can access through your career center or through the alumni center. And I have found in my work with a university previously that a lot of these directories are pretty incomplete. Most alumni aren't actively thinking to update that directory every time they get a new job. So I would start the search off with LinkedIn first. And when you find the university you're at, you can go to the left side of the panel and click See Alumni, and you can then use various search features to find them. So make sure you're starting your search on LinkedIn to populate and think through which people you want to meet, and then you can cross-reference it with your school's alumni directory that could be out of date. Any questions on these 5 points so far?
And Yulia, I just want to add, and I hate to be an advertisement for LinkedIn, even though we're all talking about it, but the truth is that responding to a message could totally change your life. Back in 2013, I got a message from our current CEO who had started a company and said, "Hey, I think I want to start this new company. Do you want to get coffee?" And I had never heard of him really. I did some Googling, did my research, but I just responded because I was like, why not? I happened to check LinkedIn, wasn't doing anything. It was February of 2013. It was very cold. And I responded, and that ended up being my career for the last 7 years. So please make sure to keep your LinkedIn updated to connect with people. And if people are writing you, it doesn't hurt to respond, doesn't hurt to always want to learn more.
Absolutely. And also respond thoughtfully and kindly, not like, who are you? You can all do research and look up who is it that has reached out to you. I recall this past fall when I was still working with Stanford, one of the students in the program had gotten a message from a stranger, and it was a professional message asking if she would be interested in an internship. And she kind of ran over to me and said, "Yulia, like this random person reached out to me. Should I respond?" And I said, "Well, what's this person's name? What's their email? Let's find them." And we found the person on LinkedIn, and they were actually a serial entrepreneur. They had multiple businesses that had exited, that had done well. And the person was launching their third business and was looking to potentially hire one of my students as a future intern. And so I said, that's really good. You didn't automatically dismiss the person, that stranger that reached out, in the same way that Alex has this great story about landing her, or, working now with a person who had reached out of the blue. So don't dismiss people. Definitely do their research and see who they are. But in the same way, always practice caution and make sure that you're responding to legitimate people, legitimate companies, and not spam mail. Thank you for sharing that example. I love that. Now, in terms of staying in touch, you're all spending time this summer building a network. Very few people actually stay in touch, and I think that really sets apart people who continue to get access to new opportunities and learn more. And I believe that, unfortunately, many people don't stay in touch effectively. So one thing to keep in mind is, what is the person's preferred channel of communication? Is it Twitter? Do they like to engage in Twitter dialogue? Are they on that platform regularly? Do they prefer LinkedIn messages? I think for recruiters, a lot of recruiters get an overwhelming number of LinkedIn messages, so that might actually get you lost in the shuffle. Perhaps email is the better way to communicate. So with any person you meet, think about, what is the channel, or even ask them, what is your preferred communication style? Do you prefer I stay in touch with you over Instagram DM because you have an open profile and you work in, the fashion tech industry? Perhaps. Or do you prefer email or some other channel? So think thoughtfully about that. And also think about not only sending emails asking if there's a new job or a new posting. A lot of employers are still determining their headcount for this coming year and coming summer, both in terms of headcount for new grads as well as interns. So many of them don't yet know what positions they're hiring for. So emailing every single week to ask if there's been a new posting isn't necessarily the best way to make a strong impression. Think about, are there other ways you can build value between the employer and the student? Perhaps you have done research and you notice that there is a new initiative of a startup you follow, and it actually ties in very nicely to the research you're doing in a lab. Well, that's a really excellent way to reconnect and say, hey, I noticed your lab is doing X. I actually have access to a really great group of students also with this specialty. Perhaps we could do a lunch and learn between this lab and what your startup is doing. Think creatively and find new ways to engage. So those are a few tips on staying in touch. Alex, do you have any other additions?
Nope, I think that is all great tips.
Awesome. So I'll turn it over to you to discuss resumes and cover letters.
Awesome. So resumes and cover letters, really important. And again, now that you have all summer, maybe you all are taking it easy, maybe you're networking, but it's a great time to work on your resume. And even if you aren't sure you're going to be applying to jobs, just have an idea of what you might want to say in a cover letter, can do some practices as well. So we'll start with some resume do's and don'ts. I love reviewing resumes, and I love telling people why their resume sucks. So I know that I know URX is offering that, but I also want to offer myself up. If anybody wants to get in touch with me, you can find my email. You can find me on LinkedIn, but I'm always happy to do a resume review and tell you maybe what you can do to improve. But some overall do's. Please keep it to one page. I know that all of you are sort of in school, recent grads, no reason for it to be 2 pages. And always send it as a PDF unless it is requested as a, Word doc or whatever that reason is, only because I get things all the time that I can't even open, whether it's on my phone or whether it's a certain program. For example, like I get things in Pages, which is that weird Mac program, and I can't open it. So by sending it as a PDF, you're ensuring that that whoever is getting it via email at least can definitely open it. As far as the design, keep it clean with a lot of white space to make sure it's really easy to read. The toughest thing as a recruiter is you have to look at so many resumes. And because of that, if things are difficult to see, as far as like what your experience is, the bullet points or anything like that, if it's gonna like be really difficult for me to find that information, I'm probably gonna move on. So keep it clean, lots of white space. I know sometimes people like to use colors, fun fonts, graphics. Feel free to do that, maybe just at the top, when it has your name, and also consider the type of company that you are applying for. Is it the type of place where they really want someone creative where you can kind of show that off? I also recommend using a resume template. Canva is really great for that, as well as if you Google resume templates. There are so many there. Totally fine to use that if, designing one in InDesign isn't your thing. As far as the responsibilities, get really specific. You can start out with kind of your most significant accomplishment and then talk through the accomplishment, the result, and the benefit to the company. What kind of difference did you make? What do you want to brag about? And ideally, all of your accomplishments would include results and numbers too. I don't want to read a bullet point and feel like it could be on anybody's resume. I want it to really be detailed to you and what you did. And as far as some don'ts, don't use a school email address. You can start using a Gmail or maybe your website email, whatever it is, that's fine. Obviously not an old, non-professional one, but it is definitely time to kind of migrate to a professional email address versus the school one. I also don't recommend using a photo. I know some people do that, especially in the creative space. You just really don't want any recruiter to kind of have any of these preconceived notions about you or biases. And as much as, we'd like to say that people aren't going to do that, a photo often will do that subconsciously.
One thing to that about the photo, and another point of that I have really counseled students and professionals to think about is also the address. I did not grow up in the fanciest part of New York, and I actually live quite far from a lot of the offices that I had worked in. And I left out my address because I know some people, not even thinking might think, oh, that person lives really far, or maybe they'll have a hard time getting into work on time, et cetera, which I have not. I've been able to do that, and I, bore that long commute. But be thoughtful of, some people do have prejudice and bias against certain addresses or certain neighborhoods, et cetera. And so I would leave the address off for that reason, as well as the fact that your resume is going to go in the hands of many different people. And I have never heard of anyone in the last 10 years getting their first interaction with a company over snail mail. That's probably happening over email anyhow, email or phone number. So make sure you have your email, phone number, and LinkedIn, but I would not actually include your current address or mailing address. I would just leave the address out for your privacy and to reduce bias.
That is a great tip, and I totally agree. It's so funny to think about how that was the standard so many years ago, and now totally not necessary.
But parents and career officers are still saying this, and I really do think that is something from an older time, a different time, especially in tech, media, et cetera, like pretty digital industries. No one's going to be using your mailing address, so just leave that out.
Yeah, great advice. I also don't think you need to include any coursework that is unrelated. Keep everything that is sort of extra on your resume that is really related to the industry or the work that you want to be doing. And the skills section is really one of my favorite things to talk about because I hate skills sections that only include, I know Twitter and Facebook. I hate it. And Microsoft Word, that's what it says. Microsoft Word, Office, and Excel, and Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Please do not do that. If those are your only skills, you don't need to include it. Instead, really focus on programs that might really be relevant to your industry. Of course, in the tech world and in some business spaces, that's really necessary. I would also say that when it comes to Twitter and Facebook and other social, get specific with the stuff that you really know. So, for example, if you're really good with advertising on Facebook, feel free to use that as in your skills section, or doing Instagram stories, or honestly, even TikTok. If you're some TikTok pro, put that down because that really sets you apart. But be specific about the skills that you actually have in relation to these sites and how it would translate into the job itself. In addition, I'm sure all of you have seen those skills graphics where it shows hey, I know Twitter this much, but I know Facebook this much. Please don't do that. That really just tells me that you don't know Facebook, or you don't know Twitter as much as you know Facebook. Not necessary. Ideally, all of the things that you are listing on your resume in your skill section, you are proficient in them. And so we don't need to know how proficient. Next, I would say you don't need to use first person or I, in the body of the resume itself. You also don't need to list references on there. I'm sure that someone will ask for references kind of towards the middle of your, end of your interview process, and then you can give it to them, but you don't need to just voluntarily give it to them. And I also, when it comes to listing those bullet points and the descriptions of your experiences, no need to repeat yourself in bullet points. If you do the same thing at 3 jobs, then just list it at one of them, and use up that space for the other 2 at listing new skills or tasks that you have. So I really think that is a great place to start, at least with the resume. And I'm seeing a lot of awesome questions.
I'm trying to get some of them on our chat, but I'll also give you a second to look at the chat in case there's anything that came up that you want to address as I address one of the points you made about the coursework. So in my industry, in tech, coursework does matter quite a bit sometimes. So there are certain foundational classes that I want to ensure you have completed. And the technology that a company is building out, they might really love additional advanced coursework in machine learning or specific cybersecurity classes, et cetera. So the coursework question is a bit industry specific. And the thing I always encourage students to do, and I replied to Sybil's question around UX designers, think about, these are generally applicable tips across industries, but to make sure your resume is appropriate for your industry, make sure you're asking people who are in that industry in particular, whether it's older undergrads or graduate students who have interned in your industry, or it's somebody at your career center whose focus is on your industry, or it's alums or people in your network who work in your desired industry. So some of these things do vary a little bit industry to industry, but they're generally applicable across the board, especially the one-page only rule. That is very much a thing that people look out for, not only because it's easier to dissect the information, but sometimes if you are sending something that's 2 or 3 pages, people are only going to see the first page anyhow. So be careful with that. I'm going to move on to the next slide, Alex, if you're ready.
Yeah, absolutely. And right before that, I'll address just a couple questions. So is mentioning a relevant internship from high school a good idea when applying to entry-level job, other internships while in college? If you're a freshman or sophomore in college and you don't have a lot of other experience, absolutely, you can mention a high school experience. At least what I've seen, especially if it's a special internship that you got where you really did great work experience. But obviously, once you graduate, would definitely move away from any high school experience and would focus on what you did in college, or during the summer or right after college. It is totally fine to include any experience that you did, extracurricular experience that is related to what you're doing while in college. For example, I had on my resume that I was the editor-in-chief of our college newspaper really for a long time, probably about up until like a year and a half after I had graduated, because it was such a significant position that was really related. So feel free to include that, but definitely move on from high school once you graduate.
And I see Siva had a question about using keywords I think some people have this misconception that recruiters think in keywords. We actually read sentences and we don't just think in keywords. I would use keywords if you have as headlines for different experiences. So let's say you have experience both as a writer and you have experience as a designer, and you might want to split up the experience section of your resume and say writing experience, and then separately have design experience. So that's how I would leverage keywords, but I wouldn't necessarily have like bullets that start with a keyword and then you expand upon it. People do read your resume, but you want to make sure it's organized, and you can use those keywords or headlines as a way to add clarity if you've had multiple tracks of career paths or opportunities you've pursued.
Absolutely. And Rachel, who asked about resume advice for anyone switching careers. So one thing I typically tell people to do is not do an objective or sort of that intro statement at the top, but actually for somebody who is transitioning careers, it's not a bad idea. And that actually also really leads into cover letters as well, which if you are transitioning careers, you're going to really want to take advantage of that as well. So assume that your cover letter matters for all roles within communications, marketing, editorial, other creative spaces. as a sort of general rule, it probably is less important for finance and technology roles. And Ilya, you can speak maybe a little bit to that, but you still always want to include a cover letter if they're asking for one. And even when they don't ask for one, if it's an optional thing to upload, I always say do it anyway. You have nothing to lose by including an awesome cover letter that will only help you. It will never hurt you. And you really want to customize the cover letter. I wouldn't say you need to customize the entire thing. A lot of things you read online will say, hey, should be writing an individual cover letter for every job that you apply to. That would be awesome, but maybe it's not so realistic. So you should be at least customizing one paragraph or so from that. I typically tell people to keep it short, sweet, about 3 paragraphs. Start with an intro that really grabs my attention as a recruiter. You can talk about why you're interested in the role and the company. Please get detailed and show that you've done your research and that you're familiar with the company. And of course, proofread it and do not say another company's name in that cover letter. You would be surprised at how often that actually happens. All the time. And then you want to kind of talk through how your skills match up with the role's requirements, but don't just repeat your resume. I love those cover letters that kind of tell me a story and are a little bit narrative in nature. You can really set yourself apart by giving examples and really quantifying anything that is on your resume. Maybe your resume kind of just is a little bit more general, but you want to get a little bit more into one of the accomplishments that you list on your resume that is very relevant to the role you're applying to. Definitely include that, and feel free to go get detailed with that. Don't waste time and valuable space. Every sentence counts when you are doing a cover letter because, once again, recruiters do not have a lot of time. And finally, please ask a friend or somebody to proofread and review it. You should also be doing that for your resume, only because when you're looking at something over and over again, it's likely you're going to miss something, but having a friend take a look means that they might catch a typo or something that doesn't make sense. So those are sort of all my general cover letter best practices. Anything to add, Yulia?
Yeah, so I would add for technology, people do look at cover letters. I think the earlier stage your company, the smaller the team, and perhaps the fewer the roles, meaning there are only 2 internship opportunities versus 40, the more likely they'll actually take a look at the cover letter because each hire is going to be a really big portion of the team. I generally don't like to see very long cover letters because I think many people have a difficult time staying concise and on target. So I've personally loved cover letters where they might be 1 paragraph of the context and general, here's how I fit in to the company, and then maybe 3 or 4 bullet points of specific ways that my past experience will tie in to the challenge at hand or the challenges that the intern is being asked to resolve. I think a lot of people will also focus their cover letter story about how they stand to gain experience and how they would love to work there because it really aligns with them. Think also of the other party and what is it that you can contribute to the other company. So for example, if you have had an internship before in a similar function or in a similar domain, let's say you have done a software engineering internship at a fintech company, perhaps for your next internship application where you're writing a cover letter to another company in the fintech space, you might want to actually highlight that you're not a novice to fintech because that closes the gap between what the requirements of the position are and what you can bring. So as much as you can, you want to show that you're able to contribute to the role soon. And of course, you have lots to learn. We all do. We all, for any job or internship we apply to, we are going to not know everything in the job. But you want to find the ways to bridge what you have currently with what the position's asking for. So you're kind of meeting them halfway versus using the cover letter to say, I have all these things I lack, and here's all the things I stand to gain from your company, and not meeting the company halfway. I'm sure there's something you can offer them. And again, I would play up any ways that you can provide value from the get-go and play up those experiences. I hope that makes sense.
All great tips, Yulia. I want to answer a couple questions here. So Omar asked, are there any resources where I could get my resume checked and reviewed? Absolutely. So URX, I know, is doing that. So I think they might have some great resources. I would also check out a company called FindSpark. They work on a lot of early career talent and do resume reviews. I'm also happy to do a resume review for you. And for people on this call, you can email me, alex@bustle.com. Happy to take a look. And I would also reach out to, you can reach out to other people in the industry, maybe who you have a connection with, especially on LinkedIn. If it's a previous employer, I'm sure also they would be happy to look at it. And in your educational toolbox as well. So maybe there is somebody from your college or graduate school or whatever it is that can take a look as well.
Let's make sure we get through I think I want to make sure we have space for Q&A. So should we move on to the employer assessments and then get to the Q&A at the end?
Yeah, sounds good. So employment assessments. Now, this is a piece where, again, will depend on the industry that you're going to. Here at Bustle Digital Group, we do a lot of employment assessments. We do them really for our technology roles. We do it for our sales and marketing roles and our editorial roles. So what that is basically a test or a working, something that you're kind of working on that is related to the job that you're going to be doing. It could happen before a first interview where it screens out unqualified candidates. It could happen after the first interview, but before the second, or even in the final stages. And really what it's doing is testing, can you do the job? Do you have the skills needed? It really is a good sign, though, if you are asked to do it, because companies don't send out these assessments to every single candidate. So if they're sending it to you, it means that your resume impressed them, your cover letter impressed them, so you're really in the next stage there. Start out by doing your research and reading Glassdoor interview tips and Google how the company approaches the assessment. Famously, a lot of big companies like Google do them, but also, companies like Spotify make you fill it out and kind of do them even before the interview stage. And so make sure you're doing that research and finding out what exactly they're looking for and what the expectations are.
And these are not to be dismissed. Some assessments also, there's some coding challenges that you might have. If you don't do well on that, you will be screened out. I think a lot of people think just because you get that assessment, they're already guaranteed you'll get to the next step. They absolutely count, and you cannot do subpar work because that work will be taken into the evaluation of your candidacy. I have seen some people who look great on paper not put in the time to doing great work in the assessment and then not proceed to the earlier stages of an interview sequence.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it could be in the form of a personality test, skills test, like Yulia mentioned, as far as coding, situational judgment tests, which are basically saying, how would you respond to this happening? What would you do in this situation? That actually might also happen in an interview itself. So kind of be prepared for that, and a case study as well. Just learn as much as you can about the company and the role. And it is okay, at least if you are emailing with somebody, to ask questions beforehand and understand what your expectations are. I know when people we do these editorial tests where we really just want to see how somebody's writing skills are. It's great because it is kind of an equalizer. We are evaluating people on that work itself versus, what past work that they did at that moment. I would also say that you can practice, but really don't stress about it. The truth is that you're going to do what you can, and that is all right. For each one of these that you do, you're going to learn more and more. And so don't stress and sort of panic, just do the best that you can, and it should work out.
Awesome. And we have 10 minutes now to do some Q&A. I know there's a moderator panel that I have access to. So if you want to come on the screen and ask questions live, you're welcome to, or you can put questions in the chat feature and we'll address those as they come in. Do you have any questions around any of the topics we covered, whether it's building out your network, staying in touch with that network, thinking through your resume, working on your cover letter, or preparing for employment assessments? Feel free to ask them away. And we have 10 minutes.
Awesome. I see a question about white space. It is hard to have white space left when trying to put everything on one page. Totally get that. And I think what you want to do is evaluate every single thing on there. You mentioned graduate and undergraduate projects. Is it relevant to the job you're applying for? And can you kind of tighten up your language there? If you are reading through things and you're like, actually, this doesn't matter, I mentioned it somewhere else, it has nothing to do with the job I'm currently applying to, please take it out. Another tip is to kind of have maybe a 2-page long working resume of sorts that then when you are applying to things, you are kind of copy pasting the stuff that is necessary for the role. And that way you're only keeping it to that one page.
And it's really hard to, I think in writing, they call it kill your darlings. So things that you've spent a lot of time thinking through, a project, a prior experience, etc. It's really hard for us to personally be able to make that determination of which things to cut out. So that's where asking a former employer or somebody in the industry, whether it's a student in the industry or a working professional, ask them what really stands out on the resume. One of my favorite assignments I used to give the students in the program I managed was this 1-minute resume test, where you give your resume to someone who doesn't know you or doesn't know you well, and you ask them to look at the resume for a minute, which, by the way, is longer than most resumes get looked at. And then once the minute stops, hard stop, and ask the person, what do you recall from my resume? What stands out? Given what you saw on my resume in that 1 minute of time, what industry or career do you think I'm trying to build? And it was always such a fun exercise to do with the students, because I think they finally realized how little time there is to make that decision and how everything that's on the resume really needs to relate to the job that you're trying to get in the door for. So this 1-minute test can help you make a good judgment of which experiences to leave on your resume and which to leave out. And the paradox is, sometimes the more information you have on your resume, the more confusing it actually is. So it's to your disadvantage when you have no white space and no clear headers as to, here's my writing experience, here's my design experience, here's my recruiting experience. It actually throws the person off because they can't figure out how to tie the thread. So a concise resume with white space and a great accompanying cover letter will help start to build the picture of who you are as a candidate, versus words everywhere that seem unconnected with the actual role you applied for. Are there any other questions coming in?
I see another question from Siva about career switching. Can we mention or highlight transferable skills in the cover letter? 100%. That is the truth about, pretty much there are so many skills that can be transferred to another role. So don't think that just because you're switching industries or looking for a totally new type of job that nothing that you've done in the past can be relevant, because it absolutely can. And you just have to think about what those things are and highlight those things. Not only do you want to highlight them in the cover letter though, but you want to include that in the resume. And if that means that your bullet points or descriptions in the resume is different, depending on where you're applying because of the job being different, then that might be the case. But again, to Yulia's point, you always want to make sure that those bullet points are reflective or could show somehow how you could contribute and do the job that you're applying for.
That's a great point. I'm going to answer the 2 LinkedIn questions, then I'll turn over to you to answer the question around the difference between an interview and an employment assessment. But to answer the questions around asking for referrals from alumni on LinkedIn and asking for referrals or endorsements, I'll start on the referrals and endorsements piece. So the referrals, I believe you're referring to recommendations. That I would ask from people that you've actually worked with and who know the quality of your work. So they can speak to a specific thing that you did well or a skill set that you contributed to the project. The actual things that you can just add pluses on, I don't see people really paying attention to the, I got 63 likes for public speaking. I haven't seen that be a big driving force of whether or not you get reached out to. So that's the difference of how I think about the recommendations, which can help further encourage a recruiter or a hiring manager to consider your application, right? If I see a student has really great recommendations and their previous managers say something like, I would hire this person again in a heartbeat, or we couldn't have done this project well without them, perfect. I love seeing that kind of recommendation. But if I'm just seeing 63 people like someone's public speaking skills or 10 likes for social media skills, that really doesn't give me enough context or of what those skills really are. So I wouldn't prioritize those endorsements. I would prioritize the recommendations if you want to get a few quick ones. The second question was around asking for a referral from an alum on LinkedIn. Generally, when you ask for a referral, you want to have had some kind of context or conversation with somebody. You can't really just reach out to a stranger who has no idea who you are or what your work is and say, can you please refer me? That is a bit of a tricky situation because any kind of recommendation or referral is also a reflection of the person doing that referral. So if I am referring somebody, I will have at least 1 or 2 conversations to understand, is this somebody worth referring? Is their experience in line with what the person who's hiring is looking for? So I wouldn't do blindly asking people for referrals. I would actually first leverage LinkedIn and your directories, et cetera, to build relationships with people, show why you are somebody worth referring and worth backing, and then ask, hey, I love this conversation. I'm so glad that you also loved, the Newhouse School of Journalism at Syracuse. It sounds like this role that Bustle is hiring for is really in line with my experience covering millennial politics on campus. Would you be open? Would you feel comfortable referring me for the role? So you never want to force people into giving you a referral. You want them to feel confident in your application and your candidacy and to want to pass you along. I hope that clarifies the questions around LinkedIn. And I'll turn it over to Alex on the distinction between interview and employment assessment.
Absolutely. So Jocelyn, thank you for asking that question. Really what the difference is interview is exactly what, we're all typically trained for. It is asking about past experience, asking about, what you would bring to the role, why you're interested in the company, all those normal questions that we all know the answers to. But an assessment is really testing what skills are you bringing to the role. Do you have the skills to be able to do the job? And really showing whether it's a good fit for you, both whether it's a good fit for you and whether you would like, it's an early example of what the work might be. And Yulia mentioned that on her end, for the tech roles, it really is important to kind of do well, and because you need to have some kind of skill set in order to do some roles. I kind of recommend just really knowing what the expectations are. There's going to be plenty of roles that might not have any assessments, but just be prepared and do your research if that were to come up.
That's awesome. Can you still hear me, Alex? Great.
Yes,
I accidentally pressed the wrong button and exited out for a brief second. I wanted to move on to Kayla's question around strategies you recommend to stay connected with professors. That certainly depends on what area they are in. It looks like you are looking to work in the book publishing industry, and there's English professors you'd love to stay in touch with. That's a fabulous idea. Why? Because professors have an access to students from across different generations, different graduation years, and who are now working in a variety of different industries. I would think of a professor as somebody that I would touch base with perhaps once or twice a year. You don't have to be emailing them every month like, hey, just started my new job. Hey, got a kudos at work, right? You want to think about, first and foremost, anyone you're staying in touch with, whether it's a professor or a recruiter or a hiring manager or a former boss. What is a priority for that person? So perhaps, Kayla, for your professors in English, maybe some are very involved with helping the careers of their students. So you could offer yourself as somebody who's happy to be, an alum they can call and share content information about. I would set up a Google alert on the professors that you want to stay in touch with. So anytime that those professors come up in the news, you get a little notification saying, so-and-so professor got promoted or got tenure, or so-and-so professor just decided to leave this institution and is now working a different one. These little alerts and news pieces are going to give you really great natural opportunities to re-engage, to congratulate people, or to perhaps find ways to offer value and add additional information to them. And it goes without saying, I would certainly make sure you have their contact information. If your professor is not on LinkedIn or Twitter or other things, what is an email that they'll be using regardless of where they work? That way you can stay in touch with them throughout various job changes that they might make. And likewise, from your end, make sure you're giving people the email address that you'll be reachable at, since many university email addresses do expire after you graduate.
And I would just real quick add that, a professor will just help you out and make those connections. Unlike, somebody within the industry who you did an informational with where you're just emailing, hey, can you connect me with all these people and they're really busy. The difference is I feel like a professor, you can actually just ask for help to connect with people, unlike, a network contact where it might be a little annoying to them or they might be overwhelmed. But a professor, they want everyone to succeed. If you know them well, I actually think it's okay to kind of go out there and be like, hey, I need help with this. Do you have any connections here?
Absolutely. And Song has a question about watching the recording. I believe that URX posts that online afterwards, perhaps in the coming week. So I'm sure you will be able to find it on that. And the organizer says yes. Maybe there's time for one or two last questions before we wrap things up and turn it back. Are there any final questions or points to clarify? Maybe we answered all the questions.
Yeah, and hopefully all of this stuff, you all are kind of taking notes and kind of can spend the rest of the summer making the most of it by working on all these things.
All right, I think those are the last of the questions. Thank you to both of you for hosting this. This was very insightful and very helpful. Yulia's right, we do post this in our URX for Student group on LinkedIn. So if you haven't had a chance, please join that. And we found a winner for our resume review. Let me find the name for that. Give me 1 second. It is Trent Gaylord, and the next person to actually review the resume would be Yulia. So you'll be meeting with Yulia for our resume review. We will connect both of you after this event. And we do have another event next week, and Wednesday and Thursday we'll be posting more information and sending it out. Again, thank you to Yulia and Alexandra for this, and hopefully we can all connect on LinkedIn. And if you guys want more information, please add these two on LinkedIn.
And again, I'm happy to offer myself up for any other resume reviews as well. If you really need it, you can email me, alex@bustle.com, or I prefer that over LinkedIn. So you can connect with me on LinkedIn, but don't ask me questions on LinkedIn. I will not.
Yeah, I get a ton of messages on LinkedIn. I'd rather have it on email. So good to know. All right.
Yeah, I prefer email as well. Take care. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.